We always go crazy for the big moments in football, right? The goals, the crazy dribbling skills, the unbelievable saves.
Yeah, for sure.
But what about those kind of secret weapons, the things you don't see on the highlight reel?
Right.
Well, today we're going to do a deep dive into one of those crucial, but often overlooked elements of the game: scanning and perception.
It really is amazing how much happens away from the ball, you know? It's not just about what you do when you have it. It's about how you get ready for that moment, how you see the game unfold before it even gets to you.
Exactly. It's kind of like when you're walking in a really crowded city. You're not just staring straight ahead.
Yeah.
You're always checking what's around you. You're anticipating how people are going to move, making sure you don't run into anyone.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. That awareness is exactly what scanning is all about. It's gathering information, understanding your surroundings, anticipating what's going to happen next on the pitch.
So for those of us who haven't spent hours and hours breaking down game film, what exactly does scanning look like in football, and why is it such a big deal?
So basically, scanning is about moving your head and your eyes quickly and intentionally to gather information. Players aren't just watching the ball. They're actively looking for clues about their teammates, their opponents, the space on the field.
So like how we check our blind spot before switching lanes in a car.
Exactly. It's something we kind of do automatically in everyday life. In football, it's just as important.
Okay, so let's talk elite level.
Yeah.
How much are these top players actually scanning compared to, say, an amateur player?
Well, there's a researcher named Jourdain who's a pioneer in this area, and his work has shown a huge difference. Players in the Premier League, which is one of the best leagues in the world, they scan way more than amateur players.
Really?
And get this, the best players in the Premier League, guys like Lampard and Gerrard, these guys were the top scanners. It's not a coincidence.
Okay, so better player, more scanning. But how does that actually translate to better performance on the field? What's the link?
Think of it like this. The more you scan, the more information you have. You know where your teammates are. You know where the defenders are positioned. You know where the space is. And that means you can make better decisions under pressure.
Right.
And you can make them faster. Think about strikers like Mbappe and Haaland. They score a ton of goals, but Jourdain's research also shows they are unbelievable scanners. They're always checking the situation around them, which makes them even more dangerous.
There's that story I read about a young player watching film of Cesc Fabregas, and the player was just blown away by how much Fabregas was scanning, even without the ball. It was like he was always a step ahead, planning his next move before he even got the pass.
Yeah, exactly. That's what makes a great player. They're not just reacting, they're anticipating. And that anticipation comes from always gathering information through scanning.
So if it's that important, can't coaches just tell their players, hey, look around more? Is it that simple?
Unfortunately, no. It's not quite that easy. Just telling someone to look more is kind of like telling them to be more confident.
Yeah.
It's too general. It doesn't give them any concrete steps to actually get better. That's where targeted training comes in.
Okay, so what's that look like for scanning?
Think of it this way. You have a cookie jar on a high shelf. You need a step stool to reach it, right? That step stool, in this case, is labeled check your shoulder. Targeted training is all about drills that force players to scan and then reward them for doing it. You're setting up situations where scanning is the key to success.
That's a great analogy. So you're not just giving them a vague command. You're building an environment where scanning is essential.
Right.
What are some examples of those kinds of drills?
There are a ton of great drills out there. One is called the color drill. The players in the middle, they're passing to teammates. And a coach is holding up cones of different colors behind them. The player has to scan, see the color, and then sprint to the matching cone.
So it forces them to process info and react quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Super useful in a game. Another one is called phosphenes. Players are passing in a grid, and the coach is yelling out questions about what's around them, like, what color shirt is the player to your left wearing? Or how many players are behind you?
So even when they're focused on the ball, they have to be aware of everything else.
Precisely. It pushes them to think and act at the same time, just like they have to in a game.
That's interesting. So coaches can really use these drills to make a difference in a player's scanning, and then that leads to better decision-making on the pitch.
Exactly.
It's interesting, isn't it? We focus so much on physical skills in football, like passing, dribbling, shooting.
Yeah, absolutely.
But like we've been talking about, these mental skills, like scanning, they're super important too.
Yeah, they're like the mental tools that make those physical skills really work.
It's like football's for people who think. You can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't understand what's happening around you, you're not going to be great.
Right. You're exactly right. The best players aren't just good athletes. They're smart. They're always thinking, making decisions, solving problems on the fly. It's like a super fast chess match, but with your feet. And scanning is at the heart of that mental quickness. It's the foundation for making those smart, split-second decisions.
And speaking of that, we were talking earlier about how traditional rondos maybe aren't the best for building scanning skills.
Yeah.
So what should coaches be looking for when they're watching players in a scrimmage? How can they tell if a player isn't scanning enough?
One of the biggest signs is something we call tunnel vision. The player is so focused on the ball, they don't see anything else going on around them. They might make a pass that seems obvious to them, but it gets intercepted because they didn't see that defender right there.
It's like they're wearing blinders.
Yeah, exactly. And that often leads to bad decisions under pressure. They panic, they rush their passes, and they turn the ball over because they haven't taken the time to scan and see what their options are.
Okay, so what about the opposite? What does good scanning look like? What should coaches be looking for?
You'll see them moving their heads all the time, even when they don't have the ball, checking over their shoulder, looking behind them, taking in the whole field. They're not just looking. They're actively searching for information.
Like those meerkats that pop their heads up and look around.
Exactly. They're always alert and aware. And I bet those players are much more calm and collected on the ball.
Yeah, they probably make better decisions. They find their teammates who are open, and they don't make as many mistakes.
You got it. It's amazing how something as simple as moving your head can make such a huge difference in how a player performs. It shows you how important it is to train these mental skills alongside the physical ones. You can't just expect players to develop good scanning habits on their own. We have to actually teach them.
So we talked about those targeted drills, which are great for practicing that scanning motion. But how can coaches encourage scanning in a more realistic setting, like during a scrimmage?
That's a great question. One thing you can do is actually pause the play at important moments and ask players about what they were thinking. For example, if a player makes a bad pass, stop the game and ask them, what did you see before you made that pass? What were your other choices?
So they're kind of reliving that moment and becoming more aware of their own thought process.
Exactly. It's like taking a picture of their mental state at that crucial moment. And by asking those questions, you help them connect what they see with what they do. It's not about getting mad at them for making a mistake. It's about turning that mistake into a learning opportunity.
And I'm sure there are also times when you can point out good scanning during a scrimmage.
For sure, positive feedback is huge. If a player makes a great pass after scanning really well, the coach should make a big deal out of it. Maybe even say something like, awesome job checking over your shoulder before that pass. You saw the open space and took advantage of it.
So you're creating an environment where scanning is not only expected, but it's also noticed and rewarded.
Exactly. The more we can emphasize scanning in practice, the more likely it is those habits will show up in games.
So we know scanning is key for good decision-making on the field. What about a player's body position? Does that matter?
It matters a lot. Actually, this is another area where coaches can have a big impact. Think about it. If a player is always facing their own goal, they can't see very much. They have to rely on what we call blindside scanning, which is way harder and less reliable.
It's like trying to see everything in a room while you're staring at the wall.
Exactly. But if a player positions their body so they can see more of the field, they can get more information much easier. So we need to teach players to be aware of how they're standing and how that affects what they can see during the game.
Are there drills that can help with that?
There are. One good one is called Ring Around the Rosie.
Yeah.
Basically, you have several 2v1 possession games going on around a central possession game.
Right.
This forces some players to watch two games at the same time, which makes them think about multiple threats and opportunities at once.
So they're kind of multitasking with their eyes.
Right. And this drill teaches them a key lesson. Positioning yourself well can mean you don't have to do as much blindside scanning, and it makes it way easier to make smart decisions.
So what are some other coaching tips for body positioning?
One thing is to encourage players to receive the ball on the half turn whenever they can.
Half turn.
It just means receiving the ball with your body already slightly open to the field instead of facing your own goal. This simple change can really open up their field of vision, and they can start scanning before they even touch the ball.
So they're kind of getting a head start on making decisions.
Right. It can make a big difference in avoiding pressure, finding open teammates, and creating chances to score.
Sounds like coaches have a lot to teach players. Not just about how to scan, but also about how to stand to get the most out of their scanning.
You're right. It's about taking a well-rounded approach to developing players, an approach that understands the connection between the physical and mental parts of the game.
And it's about understanding that scanning is more than just a skill. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of being part of the game, even when you don't have the ball. It's about always being ready for what's next.
That's a great way to put it. It's about being proactive, anticipating what's going to happen, and using that information to your advantage. That's what separates the good players from the truly great ones.
So we've talked a lot about the how-to of scanning, the techniques, the drills, but I want to get into the mindset here. Like, what does a player need mentally to really become a master of scanning and perception?
It's a great question because scanning isn't just physical. It's a huge mental thing. It takes focus, discipline, and you have to be willing to be present in the game even when you don't have the ball.
Yeah, it sounds kind of tiring to always be on like that.
It can be,
Yeah.
especially at first. It's like starting any new habit or exercising a muscle you haven't used in a while. It's going to take work, but it's worth it. When scanning becomes automatic, it's like you unlock a whole new level of awareness on the field.
So as a coach, what are some of those mental qualities you'd be looking for? The things that separate players who really get scanning.
Curiosity is huge.
Yeah.
The players who are great at scanning are the ones who really want to know what's happening around them. They're not just going through the motions. They're actively trying to find information, trying to see the game from all angles.
Like little detectives on the pitch.
Exactly. And that curiosity naturally leads to another super important quality, anticipation. Great scanners are always thinking ahead, trying to guess what's going to happen next. They're not just reacting to the game. They're shaping it with their awareness.
It's like they're playing chess, thinking several moves ahead, while everyone else is stuck in the moment.
Right. That ability to anticipate comes from a deep understanding of the game and being willing to always be learning and adapting. It's about seeing not just what is happening, but what could happen based on the patterns and the clues they're picking up.
So it's seeing, but it's also understanding. Like they're developing a football brain, always taking in information, making calculations, finding solutions before they even touch the ball.
That's what we're aiming for. And it's really cool to see when a player gets that good at scanning and perception. They just flow through the game effortlessly, always in the right spot at the right time.
It's like they have a sixth sense.
You could say that. They've trained their minds to see the game differently, and that's what gives them an edge.
Okay, so let's say there's a young player out there listening to this. They want to get better at scanning and perception. What's the first step? Where do you even begin?
First, you got to know what you're doing now. Start paying attention to how much you're scanning when you're practicing and playing. Ask yourself, am I moving my head? Am I checking my shoulders? Am I looking behind me? If the answer's no, start making an effort to do those things.
You can't fix, you don't know it's broken.
Right, exactly. And once you know how you're scanning, you can start to improve. Try out those drills we talked about. Ask your coach for feedback. Watch how the pros do it. You can learn a lot just from watching.
Yeah, it's like anything else. It takes practice and patience and a willingness to keep learning and getting better.
For sure. But it's so worth it. Scanning and perception are the foundation for good decision-making. And good decision-making is what wins games.
Well, we've covered a ton in this deep dive. It's been awesome. Any last words of wisdom for our listeners?
Here's something to think about. Next time you're watching a match, pay attention to the players who aren't involved in the action. Watch how they move, how they position themselves, how they scan the field. You might be surprised by what you see.
That's a great tip. It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of the play. But there's a whole other game happening off the ball. And by paying attention to that, you start to appreciate how complex and how beautiful football really is.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, that's all for our deep dive into scanning and perception in football. Hope you learned some stuff. And even more importantly, hope it makes you look at the game in a whole new way.
Thanks for being with us. And until next time, keep your heads up and your minds in the game.
Without your face, say my coach supreme, living in a digital dream.